This tweet from the Minnesota Department of Human Services got 32 million views on X when it was posted on the 29th of November. And in the post, it's thrown some pretty serious allegations out there. I'm not 100% certain on what's going on with all this stuff, but it looks like Democratic Governor Tim Walz is the center of focus on this whole thing. And it seems to be that they're blaming him for a lot of the fraud going on in Minnesota. So let's get into it a little bit. That's what I want to find out today, because I need to figure out what the hell's happening with this thing. So in that post on the 29th of November, the Minnesota Department of Human Services said, Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. We let Tim Walz know of fraud early on, hoping for a partnership in stopping fraud, but no, we got the opposite response. Tim Walz systematically retaliated against whistleblowers using monitoring, threats, repression, and did his best to discredit fraud reports. Sounds pretty stereotypical for people that are crooked. They try to discredit people that are, making accusations against them for doing dirty stuff. Instead of partnership, we got the full weight of retaliation by Tim Walz, certain Department of DFL members, and an indifferent mainstream media. It's scary, isolating, and left us wondering who we can turn to. In addition to retaliating against whistleblower Tim Walz, disempowered the Office of the Legislative Auditor, allowing agencies to disregard their audit findings and guidance. Media and politicians supporting Tim Walz or the DFL agenda attacked whistleblowers who were trying to raise red flags on fraudulent activities. Now, we actually made a video about this, how there's a bunch of Somalis in Minnesota that defrauded the government for food subsistence payments that were supposed to go towards children during the pandemic. We actually covered this in a video not too long ago. It might have been a couple weeks ago, but it was like the biggest fraud case in United States history, and it happened in Minnesota. I don't know if he was the governor at the time. I'm not 100% sure, but I do know that the Minnesota Department of Human Services and also the Office of the Legislative Auditor were involved in letting this happen, but it might have been because their hands were tied, because if Tim Walz was governor at the time and he was putting pressure on them to just let these things happen and to not investigate, that would explain a lot more why there was such widespread fraud. And I would encourage you to check the video out. It's pretty bonkers. It's pretty bananas, the things that were uncovered from that. A lot of people were charged by the Department of Justice, like the federal Department of Justice, as a result. Anyway, back to this. They went on to say this is a cascade of systemic failures leading up to Tim Walz. Agency leaders appointed by Tim Walz willfully disregarded rules and laws to keep fraud reports quiet, even to the extent of threatening families of whistleblowers. Wow. Threatening their families. Good. I hope these people lawyer up. I hope they do. I hope they all lawyer up and they start a class action lawsuit if this is true. These same leaders are not qualified for their jobs. Instead, getting leadership jobs versus Tim Walz's friendships as state government were left floundering. DFL lawmakers refused to acknowledge fraud and deflected any serious conversation to stop fraud. Biased mainstream media such as WCCO and NPR showed absolutely no interest in covering fraud happening in our own state. Programs, especially in behavioral health and disability services, were built without any guardrails against fraud, all in an attempt to extract more funding from the legislature and the federal government. As staff, we firsthand witnessed and observed fraud happening, yet we were shut down, reassigned, and told to keep quiet, sometimes more. Leadership did not want to appear to discriminate against certain communities and were unwilling to take actions such as stopping fraud that would have had an adverse impact on their image. To date, no single agency leader has been held responsible for their role in fraud, whether it's Shireen Gandhi, Jess Gale, Jody Harpstead, Natasha Mers, Eric Grimdahl, or others. It is a structure created and maintained by Tim Walz, who has created an environment of interrelated agencies and institutions, including the media, that help foster fraud through retaliation and turning a blind eye in exchange for political gain in the form of high-power agency leadership jobs or other perks. Yeah, it's just straight gangster politics. That's what it sounds like. Fundamentally, Tim Walz is dishonest, lacks ethics and integrity, has poor leadership abilities, and has never taken any accountability for his role in fraud. Instead, Tim Walz deflects by blaming national politics for his own failings and distracts the public from inveterate lying. These lies include his reference of a budget surplus under his tenure. Fact is, Minnesota never had a surplus. We had been given federal ARPA funds that were conflated as surplus money. Otherwise, we'd be in a deficit. And those ARPA funds, which were meant to be temporary funds, were used to create more leadership positions for Tim Walz's buddies. As such, we can't fight fraud in Minnesota alone, hence why we're appealing to the federal levels of government. We need all the help we can get as Tim Walz's agency leaders have upped their brazen approach in covering up their knowledge of fraud. We are grateful to numerous solid politicians, especially the Fraud Committee and media outlets who are willing to halt fraud. We are also grateful to other whistleblowers who are bravely stepping up. Thank you, New York Times, for bringing the plight of Minnesota to the national stage. And then you can see the New York Times post that says, how fraud swamped Minnesota's social services system on Tim Walz's watch. Dude, when you got the New York Times, who is a very left-leaning news organization, taking a fat dump on you as a Democrat, you know you're cooked. Like 100%. That is the most scathing thing I have seen written about anybody in office in a very long time. And it's coming straight from the Minnesota Department of Human Services. I don't know how you're going to defend against that. That's pretty scathing. The following post on November 30th came out after that scathing article, or that scathing post they posted on the 29th. This one says, legislators in office of the legislative auditor, Minnesota needs an independent forensic review of DHS's compliance with the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. Trust requires transparency, and transparency requires oversight. Given the unanswered questions about DHS redaction practices and months-long delays in releasing public data, it's time to ask, is Minnesota's largest agency complying with Chapter 13? Minnesota legislators, the Office of the Legislative Auditor, and the state's Information Policy Analysis Division should initiate a formal audit of DHS's data practices. This includes redaction standards, timeliness, internal traction, and compliance protocols. Bro. Oh, here we go. Yeah, feeding our future. So they retweeted a post from September 11th of 2024 that we'll share with you guys here so you can see it. That's the video I was talking about. So I did a video on the feeding our future fraud, which was insane. $250 million in estimated fraud from feeding our future. Yep. Okay. Well, okay. So Democratic Governor Tim Walz has been in office since 2019, which means anything that happened between 2019 and right now, he was the governor presiding over the state for. So that means that all of this fraud that's happened since 2019 to 2024, 2025, the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that have gone missing or been funneled to places happened while he was the governor of the state. And it's so bad that even Democrats are like, you're cooked, dude. We're jumping ship. We're bailing out. We're not going down with the ship, dude. Sorry. That's so crazy. The core claims of this New York Times article are claiming that over $1 billion in taxpayer funds allegedly were stolen across multiple programs, with many schemes linked to individuals in Minnesota's Somali immigrant community, estimated at about 87,000 residents, or 1.5% of the state's population. Which isn't that much, but if they're the ones that are like largely involved in this, being 1.5% of the state population, there's a reason why President Trump has been talking about that specifically within that state throughout a lot of the press conferences. You've seen him talking about it, like, you know, talking about like remigration and like stripping people's visas and like kicking people out of the country, specifically from that community, and specifically the ones who are involved explicitly in these fraud schemes. Now, a lot of critics, including state employees and Republicans, have accused Walz of prioritizing political image, particularly while attempting to avoid accusations of racism over implementing safeguards, which led to extremely lax oversight on these programs during the COVID-19 pandemic, when programs expanded rapidly with federal funds. Now, Governor Walz is still attempting to run for re-election for his third term in 2026. And I don't know how that's going to happen at this point, because this thing is blown way up. Like, federal prosecutors have tied the fraud to at least 3 major interconnected schemes, resulting in 78 indictments and 59 convictions as of late November of 2025. Many of the defendants are from the Somali community, but officials emphasize that the crimes are not representative of the group as a whole. But what's crazy about this is a lot of the funds were allegedly used for luxury purchases and wired overseas, with unverified reports suggesting that some of it reached Somalia and potentially the terrorist group Al-Shabaab. Yeah. Point is the Minnesota Department of Human Services have basically accused Walz of being 100% responsible for all of this. The last thing that I saw about this particular case was the fact that the Minnesota Department of Human Services posted this morning saying, for public awareness, we did write to Kamala Harris and the DNC multiple times warning them about Tim Walz and his incompetence, fraud scandals, and retaliation. We tried our best to keep the public informed as our tweets are public. Maybe Kamala Harris turned a blind eye to fraud like her running mate? Question mark. Over the years, our messages have not changed. We need fraud to stop in Minnesota and good governance to be restored. And it sounds like they've got a real problem on their hands up there. Now, in addition to this happening, the president of the United States made a comment about Governor Tim Walz on True Social the other day, calling him a word that I'm not going to repeat on here, and my editors are not going to place in the video because it would likely result in a community guideline violation. But if you want to know what it is, you can probably find it on X, I'm sure. At this point, it's definitely on there. But he basically called him, you know, a version of mentally handicapped. I'll leave it at that. But it seems that the Minnesota Department of Human Services also believe that he is extremely incompetent and also a number of other things. Either way, this is the most scathing article I've ever seen about any governor, period. And I don't know how he's going to win re-election, but this has been like one of the biggest things in news over the past, week as this thing kept developing, especially after that scathing post they made on X on the 29th of November. So anyway, as this stuff develops, I will try to keep up with it and I'll keep you guys updated. All right, guys, that's it for the daily roll-up for today. I appreciate you watching the video all the way through. Believe it or not, it does help support the channel when you watch the video from start to finish because it tells YouTube that they should recommend that video to more people. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to support the channel in other ways, you can like this video, you can leave a comment in the comment section below, or you can share this video with your friends. And as always, we will see you guys in the next video.